There is a photograph in the archives of the Tennessean that tells you almost everything about this story before a single word is spoken. It shows the Davidson County Medical Examiner standing at a podium in Nashville. He is pausing, reporters are waiting, and the caption explains what he has been called there to address: his decision not to conduct an autopsy on Tammy Wynette, the First Lady of Country Music. Think about what that means. Not the results of an examination, not a finding, a press conference about an examination that was never performed. She had died at 55 in her own living room in the middle of the afternoon. She was one of the most famous women in American music, 20 #1 records, the voice behind Stand By Your Man, a voice that half the country could recognize inside 3 notes. And when she died, nobody opened the file. No autopsy, no toxicology, no medical examiner at the scene making an independent determination. A physician was flown in from Pennsylvania. He examined her, and he gave a cause of death, and that was the end of it. 14 months later, they dug her up. This is not a story about what killed Tammy Wynette. That question, as far as the public record goes, has an answer. This is a story about the 14 months in between, about a set of procedural decisions made in April 1998 that have never been fully explained, and about the fact that once those decisions were made, some questions could never be answered again. What follows is a story about the difference between a judgment and a finding, and about what happens when the window to make that distinction closes forever. She had been asleep on a couch in the living room of her Nashville home. That detail is in nearly every contemporaneous account, and it is worth sitting with, because it is not the detail of a woman in a hospital bed with a chart and a monitor and a nurse making hourly notes. It is the detail of an ordinary afternoon. She lay down for a nap. Her husband, the songwriter and producer George Ritchie, was in the same room. At some point that evening, he found she was unresponsive. She was 55 years old, and she had been unwell for a very long time. Not vaguely unwell, but seriously and continuously unwell, across nearly 3 decades. The medical history is extensively documented: repeated abdominal surgeries beginning in the early 70s, chronic inflammation, adhesions, infections of the bile duct requiring operations through the 90s. By 1998, there were people in Nashville who believed she was terminally ill. She toured anyway. She had been touring, on and off, through all of it. That history matters here for a specific reason, and I want to be precise about why. It does not tell us what killed her. What it tells us is that when she was found dead, there was an available explanation sitting right there. A woman with a long, severe, well-documented illness had died. It was not a surprising death. It was a plausible one. And plausible deaths are the ones that get examined least. The man who certified her death was Dr. Wallace Marsh. He was her personal physician. He was also a transplant surgeon based at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, and on the night of April 6th, he was in Pittsburgh. He was flown to Nashville. And according to the Associated Press reporting from the following year, he was the one who declared her dead, and, without the benefit of an autopsy, gave the cause of death as a blood clot to her lungs. I want to be careful here, because this is exactly the point where a story like this can go wrong. There is nothing unlawful about a treating physician certifying a patient's death. It happens constantly. A doctor who has managed a patient's care for years, who knows the medical history intimately, who has seen the scans and the surgical reports, is often the person best positioned to say what happened. A blood clot to the lungs in a patient with her documented vascular history is not an exotic conclusion. It is a reasonable one. Nothing in the public record establishes that Dr. Marsh acted outside accepted practice in certifying that death. No court found it. No medical board found it. That needs saying clearly and early, because everything that follows would otherwise sound like an accusation, and it isn't one. But here is the thing about a certification made without an autopsy. It is a conclusion drawn from history and from external examination. It is a judgment. And a judgment, however well-founded, is a different object from a finding, because a finding can be checked. What was written on that certificate in April 1998 could not be checked, not by anyone, because the evidence that would have allowed anyone to check it was, by then, being prepared for burial. This is the part of the story that has never been adequately explained, and it is the reason we are here. The certification of death by a personal physician is one decision. The decision by the county medical examiner not to conduct an autopsy is a separate one, made by a separate office for separate reasons. And that second decision was significant enough that Dr. Bruce Levy, the Davidson County Medical Examiner, stood in front of the press to address it. Consider what an autopsy performed on April 7, 1998 would have established. It would have shown the condition of her lungs and her heart directly, rather than by inference. It would have determined whether a clot was actually present at the moment of death, or whether the damage was older. And critically, it would have produced toxicology from fresh tissue, blood drawn from a body that had not been embalmed, not been buried, not spent a year underground. That last point becomes the hinge of everything that follows, so hold on to it. She had been treated for years with powerful medication for chronic pain. That is documented, and she had spoken about it herself. Any question anyone might later raise about her medication, how much, prescribed by whom, delivered how, was a question that fresh toxicology could have addressed in a single afternoon. Questions about specific drugs like Versed, the sedative that would later become central to the dispute, could have been answered definitively from fresh tissue rather than from samples taken a year after burial. Instead, there was a private graveside service. There was a public memorial at the Ryman 3 days later. Roughly 1,500 people carried on CNN and the Nashville network. And there was a crypt at Woodlawn Memorial Park. It is worth noting, in passing, that 1998 was also the year she was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, an honor confirmed while the questions about her death remained entirely open. The window closed. It would not open again for over a year, and when it did, it opened onto something much harder to read. By early 1999, the questions had a paper trail. The Associated Press reported in February of that year that 3 of Wynette's daughters had written to Nashville's medical examiner. Their position, as reported, was direct. They did not trust Dr. Marsh's determination, and they wanted their mother's body exhumed and autopsied to establish whether she had really died of a blood clot. Note what that is and what it isn't. It is not a rumor or an anonymous source or a tabloid claim. It is a documented request from immediate family to a public official on the record asking for an examination. And note the position they were in. There was no autopsy report to dispute. There was no toxicology to challenge. There was a certificate signed by a physician who had been flown in from another state, and there was a grave. If they wanted a second opinion, there was only one place left to get one. In April 1999, the 4 daughters, Tina Jones, Jackie Daly, Georgette Smith, and Gwen Nicholas, filed a $50 million wrongful death lawsuit. The defendants named were Dr. Marsh, George Ritchie, and a prescription drug delivery company, Care Solutions. Their claim, as reported, was that Marsh had mismanaged her case. Those are allegations in a civil filing. They are not findings. Nobody proved them, and as we'll see, nobody ever got the chance to try. The exhumation happened that same month. The accounts of how it came about differ in an interesting way, and I'd rather show you the disagreement than smooth it over. MTV's reporting says the daughters pressed for an autopsy, and it proceeded after Ritchie agreed. UPI reported that the autopsy was conducted with Ritchie's consent after he finally agreed to allow the procedure. Other accounts say Ritchie himself requested it to clarify how she died so everyone could move on. The Pittsburgh Tribune-Review reported that the daughters removed Ritchie from the lawsuit after he asked for the exhumation. What all of them agree on is the outcome. Her body was brought up from Woodlawn Memorial Park, and on April 14, 1999, Dr. Bruce Levy performed the autopsy that had not been performed the previous spring. In plain terms, long-standing clots had badly compromised the arteries in her lungs. The right side of her heart had been straining for years to push blood through them, and it had enlarged and dilated under that load. Eventually, the rhythm failed. In a report dated May 21st, Levy gave probable cause of death as heart failure with cardiac arrhythmia due to chronic pulmonary emboli with pulmonary hypertension. 2 substances were detected: Versed, a sedative also known as midazolam, and an anti-nausea drug, which Levy said were not present at levels that could have contributed to her death. And then there is the sentence that no amount of forensic skill could get around. Because the examination came a year after death, there was no way to determine whether the drugs found in her body had caused it. That was not a failure of the 1999 autopsy. That was a consequence of April 1998. Here is where the record genuinely contradicts itself, and where I have to tell you that I cannot resolve it for you. UPI, reporting on May 20th, 1999, described the autopsy as having found that Wynette died of natural causes, heart failure connected to her history of blood clots. But the Pittsburgh Tribune Review, reporting in 2002, described the situation differently. It said Levy ruled in September 2001 that Wynette died of natural causes, updating his 1999 opinion that the cause of death was undetermined. Both accounts cannot be straightforwardly correct. The likeliest explanation, and I want to flag that this is an inference, not something I can document, turns on a distinction that matters enormously in forensic pathology and almost not at all in ordinary speech. Cause of death is the physiological event. The heart failed. Manner of death is the classification: natural, accidental, homicide, suicide, undetermined. It is entirely coherent for a pathologist to state a probable anatomical cause while leaving the manner undetermined, pending toxicology. If that's what happened, then the 1999 autopsy answered one question and deliberately left the other open, and it left it open for more than 2 years. But I am reconstructing that from the shape of the reporting, not from the report itself. What I can tell you with confidence is that the contemporaneous coverage does not agree with the later coverage, and that this discrepancy has never been publicly clarified. In September 2001, 3.5 years after her death, Levy announced that Wynette had died of natural causes. The basis for the revision was reported specifically, and it is worth understanding because it goes straight back to the decision made in April 1998. According to the Tribune Review, Levy changed his ruling after being provided with new research by Dr. Marsh's lawyer concerning the effect of embalming fluid on the breakdown of Versed, the sedative that had been detected. Levy retested the 2 samples taken from the body and reported that he could find no traces of it. Sit with the mechanics of that for a moment. A question about a drug in her system took over 3 years to resolve, and was resolved by studying how the embalming process degrades that drug over time. That entire analytical detour existed for one reason. The only samples available had come from a body that had been embalmed and buried for a year. Fresh toxicology in April 1998 would have made the question trivial. Instead, it took until the autumn of 2001, and it arrived via research supplied by counsel for one of the defendants. That is not an accusation of anything. It is simply what the record says happened. The litigation unwound in pieces. Richie was removed from the case by the daughters, reportedly after he asked for the exhumation. In October, a federal judge dismissed Care Solutions. That left Dr. Marsh. And in April 2002, 4 years after her death, the daughters and Marsh reached a confidential out-of-court settlement over the claims that he had contributed to her death. Marsh's attorney told reporters that both parties were happy it was over and done with. The terms were not disclosed. They still aren't. And I want to be as clear as I can about what a confidential settlement is, because this is precisely where these stories get distorted. A settlement is not a finding of liability. It is not an admission. Parties settle for all sorts of reasons: cost, time, risk, exhaustion, the simple wish to stop. Dr. Marsh was never found by any court to have caused Tammy Wynette's death. What a settlement also is, though, is an ending without a verdict. No trial, no testimony under oath, no cross-examination of the decisions made on April 6, 1998. The case closed. The questions didn't get answered. They just stopped being asked in a forum that could compel an answer. So where does that leave us? The medical examiner's final ruling is natural causes. There is no evidence in the public record that anyone killed Tammy Wynette, and this video does not suggest otherwise. Her body, when it was finally examined, told a coherent story, the story of a woman who had been seriously ill for 30 years and whose heart had been quietly failing under a load it was never built to carry. That is very probably the whole of it. But very probably is where the record stops, and it stops there for a reason that has nothing to do with conspiracy and everything to do with procedure. On the day she died, a series of ordinary decisions were made. A personal physician certified the cause, and the county medical examiner declined to examine. Neither decision was unlawful, neither has ever been shown to be improper. Both were irreversible. Everything that came afterwards, the letters, the lawsuit, the exhumation, the 14 months, the 3.5 years, the research into embalming fluid, was an attempt to recover information that had been available for a few hours in April 1998 and was never collected. The unresolved question in the death of Tammy Wynette was never really what happened to her. It is why nobody looked while looking was still easy. That question has been asked at a press conference, in letters to a public official, and in a federal lawsuit. It has never been fully answered.